her family in our prayers as well. That would be really. Karen has very kindly volunteered to lead our opening devotion. So I'm going to pass over to Catherine and Karen. Thank you.
I'm going to tell you a story, and I've had to adapt things because when you're on Zoom, the screen doesn't quite work in the way that it would work otherwise. I hope you can see that. I'm just going to take my name off for a minute. Oh, you can see it. That's absolutely great. Our story is actually a Buddhist-based story, a folk tale. And it starts off with two travellers on the road. Once upon a time, there were two travellers on a road. They walked up mountains and saw stunning views. They saw green pastures and wondered at all the flowers. They saw trees and saw squirrels jumping from bough to bough, and gardens. And they heard children laughing and playing. They saw lakes and the waters gently lapping at the edges. And they walked through forests and heard birds singing. And they saw streams as they trickled over stones. How beautiful it was. But then the travellers one day came upon a woman. The woman was standing next to a young girl, and in front of them was a muddy puddle. As the travellers approached, they could hear the woman berating the child, saying, "Carry me over the puddle. I don't want to get my dress dirty." But the girl was already burdened down, and she couldn't carry the woman. As the travellers approached, the first looked at the woman scornfully. She was not very happy. How dare she talk to the child like that? And she walked past, around the puddle. The man, however, picked up the woman without her even thinking, carried her across the puddle and put her down on the other side. And then he too walked off. And now, although they walked the same path, the two travellers were on different journeys. The man who had lifted her across the puddle walked up hills and saw stunning views. He walked into valleys and saw green and flowers. He saw trees and he laughed at the squirrels as they jumped from bough to bough. He saw gardens and looked at the flowers and heard the children laughing. He saw lakes and saw the still water lapping at the edges, and forests, and he heard the birds singing. He saw streams as the water trickled the stones. How beautiful it was. But the woman who had walked past saw none of this. Her eyes saw nothing, and her ears heard nothing. And although they walked the same path, their journeys were very different. And at last the woman could hold it no longer, and she turned to the man. "Why did you pick her up?" she said. "Such undeserving woman, so rude, so disrespectful." "My friend," said the man, "I did pick her up. I did carry her, but I put her down and I left her behind. But it seems, my friend, that you actually picked her up and have been carrying her ever since. And she's holding onto your eyes, and she's holding onto your ears. Put her down and leave her. And walk on and see the beautiful things yet to come." How often we carry things that we don't need to carry. We hold on to things because we think they're the things that we should. In 1896, Judson van der Ventner, an artist and a lover of God, stood there with two things. He wanted to be an artist, and yet he loved God, and he wanted to be an evangelist, and people were telling him that he should be an evangelist. Other people were telling him he should be an artist. And he said, for some time I struggled between developing my talents in the field of art and going into full-time evangelism. And at last, the pivotal hour of my life came, and I surrendered all. I became an evangelist, and I discovered deep down in my soul a talent yet unknown to me. God had hidden a song in my heart and a touching and tender chord. Robin Mark recently resurrected that song, and it's called All to Jesus I Surrender. All to him I freely give, and I will always love and trust him in my daily life to live. I surrender all. I surrender all. All to thee, my blessed Saviour, I surrender all. And this morning, that is going to be our prayer. I surrender all.
To thee I freely give. I will ever love and trust you in your presence daily live. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm sorry about the video. Perhaps we can put the link in the chat so that people can watch the video at a later time. I'm also hoping that we're going to show a video, but I think I shall put my link in the chat as well, and we'll have a little bit of space to go away and just watch that independently. But today we were hoping that we would be able to spend a little bit of time together, really focusing on the next stage of our coming out of lockdown and the transitioning. We've had a long conversation already in this morning in our coffee time, and just listening to some of the things that people are sharing, it's clear that we're all at very different places, and there are many different expectations on us, both from people in our congregations and from user groups, and all the things that we're that are going on for us and our personal circumstances. Some of the resources that I've come across just recently, really, from CPAS, have got some helpful tools when we're thinking about the next stages, and they put them all on their website, and I will just go onto the website in a minute and just show you everything that's available there. But they've talked very much about this idea of how we respond to major disasters and emergency relief. And they've broken it down into those 3 stages of how we respond. So first of all, you get that response, which is that immediate kind of in the moment. So if we think back to last March, so last March, we can remember that sort of really kind of active moment where we were all kind of trying to get onto Zoom, trying to work out what we were going to do. Maybe we were cancelling a load of stuff and wondering what was going to happen. And at that moment, maybe, you know, in 2020, In March, we thought it was only going to be maybe 5 or 6 weeks, and then we would get back to normal. So we perhaps almost had that inertia, that waiting, because we didn't think it was going to last very long. And in that moment of that first initial response, we're kind of meeting primary needs. We're thinking about safety, we're thinking about stability, and it's that fast execution, and activists are the kind of key people in that moment. And then from sort of 6 months to 12 months, we talk about being in the recovery stage. And this stage takes a long time. And at that moment, we're kind of looking forwards and backwards. We're thinking about what's going to be, but we're also thinking about what has been. And maybe we're kind of grieving what we've lost. We're wondering whether we ever will get back to any kind of normal. And at that moment, we're kind of really in that reflective and learning stage. And thinking and reflecting, for some people, that's a really easy thing that comes very naturally. But for the activists, this can be a really difficult time of almost feeling like you're doing nothing. And, you know, there's a frustration about wanting to be able to get on. But actually, it's really important that we have that time of thinking and reflecting. And at that moment, you really need people who are emotionally engaged. We talk quite a lot about emotional intelligence now. And actually, you need people that can really read others and understand what's going on for them. And you need to be really people focused. And then once you move through the recovery time, you kind of move into reconstruction, where you begin to look forward and you begin to think about rebuilding and renewing. And at that moment, those kind of key activities, core activities, are creativity and ideas. And we're kind of living, I think, between the recovery stage and the reconstruction, where we're doing a lot of thinking, we're doing a lot of reflecting, but we're also, you know, there's lots of new ideas buzzing around, there's lots of creativity. And at this point in the proceedings, we kind of need people who are values-based strategic thinkers. We need those people who can see the big picture, and can think about where do we go now. So we're going to split the into 3 sessions really, and hopefully you will have got the questions that came out from Catherine in advance. We're going to go into our breakout rooms and we're going to have sort of 20 minutes conversation together, thinking about a question, and then we're going to come back. But I think what we also need to remember is that during this kind of COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a lot of war imagery. We've had a lot of talk of casualties, battle, you know, in the retreat, on the offensive. You know, even our doctors and our scientists have been using this kind of battle language. And obviously that in itself creates anxiety. And we know that the amount of people who've died, there is just huge sense of loss, bereavement, grief, and trauma. And we know that trauma can sometimes come back much, much later. And people are having to deal with that for years to come. So we kind of got loads of things that we're having to think about. We know that people have lacked in confidence. Some people have thrived on Zoom and some people have found the technology really helpful. And yet others have found it to be a really alienating place. So how do we hold those two things in balance? There was an article, it was a kind of animation that from the Observer, where it had a picture of 3 waves, and the first wave was the COVID-19. Then you got a bigger wave behind, which was the sort of socioeconomic consequences, unemployment and poverty. And then behind that was an even bigger wave, which was climate change. So actually, we're also having to think at this moment about not losing sight of some of those bigger issues that we know still face us, but because of the immediacy of the situation we're in now, might have been kind of put to the back of our minds a little bit. But if anybody's watched any of the Greta Thunberg, documentary series, will know just how, you know, climate change, how vital that is. And that might be something that our churches are considering and our circuits are considering as we come back out of the pandemic. What do we want to pick up in the light that we, all the things that we've said this morning, even about travel, when we think about climate change, how sensible is it to go back to some of those old ways of working, which were not environmentally friendly? Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some good conversations. If we could just take a little bit of feedback before coffee break from each of the groups, that would be brilliant. If I come to community first, there was lots of you in that group. I don't know if you managed to nobble somebody to give some feedback, but if anybody's prepared just to share something of your conversation, that would be really... Stephen, okay.
Right, sorry we said community. That threw me a bit.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, so we had quite well, I thought it was quite a rich discussion actually about how we leave in lockdown well, what do we grieve, what do we keep. I suppose the first question that we asked was really how do we define well, how we leave lockdown well.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a case of going back to what everybody wants, and it's important to realise that this is a great opportunity to consider what our community wants as well, or what our community might specifically need, particularly as we've heard in that previous video as well about social issues, issues to do with mental health and anxiety, etc. But it's a great opportunity for us to go out in terms of outreach as well. And actually, we mentioned latterly to do with electronic means as well, to do with people who have engaged with Zoom. There's also on the periphery people who might engage with Zoom that are not necessarily part of our own church fellowships. We noted the fact that quite a lot of people in our own fellowships have taken the opportunity after many years to actually step down from specific roles. So there's going to be a great deal of sort of filling in certain gaps. We felt, and we thought as well that one of the things about actually getting back was simply just that, just getting back. And to actually take things slowly, because it's quite a milestone for many people just to make that first step through the door, to get to know each other again, and say personal people, may have changed considerably during that time. We've become more circumspect amongst ourselves, and it will be interesting to see the dynamics of characters and new characters and old characters re-emerging together again. One of the things that we said that was quite prevalent was the fact was that word fellowship, and what are we actually sort of opening up to doing? And it seems that in most of our experience talking to our folks, everyone said coffee was a major deal for many people, and actually just getting back together. Some of our congregations, particularly some of our older folk, have actually literally not met at all for the best part of 15 months, 12 months. And of course, their need has to be met as well. And then just talking about things like hybrid church. It's a positive action, I think, to have a bit of each of everything. And this those words, church without walls, were mentioned as well. And it's just worth finally mentioning about our preachers and worship leaders as well. Some of which have not engaged with Zoom, some of which have, some are not necessarily coming back to our pulpits, some may have a delayed return, and it's a whole great big variety of situations that are sort of coming back into the fold. The final thing we mentioned about, just spoke briefly about, was just in terms of outreach and the possibility of use of Zoom. And also just to bear in mind safeguarding issues as well. So, as I said before, this possibility for outreach in the community, those people who are lonely or isolated, it's an important area to explore, not specifically just with Zoom and electronic means, but of course we have to bear in mind our safeguarding vulnerable adults and children as well. So a potted history of our discussion.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Steve. That sounds like a really rich conversation. Shall I come to office now? We've got quite a lot of message in the chat there from John, and you were in the office group. I don't know whether you want to share anything from that. Sorry, John, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we decided Andrew's going to report back from the group, but I thought I would share that came from Martin Atkins. We've been working with Martin at my home church in Otley, as opposed to the circuit where I work. And some of the stuff that he's passed on to us, I think is extremely useful for others to look at and consider.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. So we're coming to Angie. Thank you, Angie.
That's okay. John also shared with our group actually that in their circuit they were using a sort of four-pronged approach to look going forward with what's new, what new have they discovered that they want to keep, what they don't want to keep, what they're looking forward to going back to, and what they don't want to restart. And some of us wondered whether there was a point to have a pentagon rather than the square, and actually have a fifth point, which is what new opportunities are arising, thinking of joining in our community's desire for things to be different, for to be better, and justice and relationships to start to become more important. We were aware that a lot of our churches are grieving about what they've lost, and people, Steve mentioned about gaps in leadership, because going forward there are people not wanting to take that responsibility, not to go back to that level of responsibility, or they want to take new things on. And some of our circuits had churches where they were really wanting to respond to people's need for human contact with small group gatherings or walking groups, or just in smaller contexts to reconnect to people. Some of our churches were prioritizing community use of their buildings as a response. And because we're all coming from such a wide range of experience from the last 18 months, how kindness going forward is the key, because we and whether we also as individuals need to show that, but also coach each other to respond kindly. And that made me think of some of the response of our community groups who are getting frustrated,
Yes.
And to understand it from their perspective as well. We also looked at it as individuals, how we were responding, and some of us liked working from home and the flexibility, and we're hopeful that going forward that would be possible. We acknowledged the difficulty of working from dining room table. We had a lot of dining room table talk, and a fascinating idea, which I hadn't thought of, was moving places with your family members around a table. So at one point you're all sat with laptops, and then the next point you've shuffled round. Some of us were thankful for less travel because of less impact on the environment. And there was a point made that buildings were easier sometimes to inspect and work on when they're unoccupied. And then we also talked about how some of us had found were grieving the lack of gaps between meetings to implement things, but actually, frankly, just to think and process. Yeah. And how going forward that can be something we choose to address, even if we keep in some things in the digital realm. Yeah. So we can get better at some of the things we've learned, not Absolutely. Just keep them going.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And it's interesting, isn't it, because this discovery phase is marked by reflection and thinking, and we've almost wiped out all our reflection and thinking time. So if we are going to do this phase well, we really do need to build that back in somehow. Otherwise we're shooting ourselves in the foot. Thank you ever so much, Angie. Can I come to the children's group now, please?
Yeah, that'll be me. I've been volunteered to do it, but everybody's going to jump in as and when,
Excellent,
if I've missed anything, which I probably will. So yeah, I think we echo everything that everybody has said. Yeah, about the volunteers wanting, putting things down and maybe just taking forward things that are really valued. So that might be a challenge for us, but it might also be an opportunity. So we need to. That is something that we're going to have to be carefully thinking about as well. And our volunteers, of course, may have had vaccines, may not have had vaccines, so maybe feeling sensitive about coming out, maybe completely happy. So again, that's all got to be taken into account as well. So yeah, I think generally it's just going to be really difficult because we're trying to second guess how people are going to feel come September-ish, when actually they may not even know themselves. And like we don't even know ourselves what people are going to be feeling. So it's trying to bring everybody along as best you can while they might be, doing that recovery and the needing nurturing and healing and being together again, but then also honouring the wanting to make changes and, think about social justice and think about the environment and do all those things. So I think it's going to be quite a tricky year. So I think one of the things we said was just, do you know what? I think we've just got to be honest with people and just say, look, we're going to try this. And we're going to try, we understand that some people are going to feel like this. Some people might not feel like that. So we're just trying to include you all as best we can. We'll make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect. But, just keep talking to us. So just being honest, I think, is part of it as well. One of the things we did like is that how talking about mental health, it was in the right direction, but even more so talking about mental health is even more okay now, which is brilliant. It's really, really good. And I think somebody noticed that mental health, making sure that, any sort of psychological effects on volunteers, things appeared in a risk assessment, which we thought was really, really great. Talked about going forward, making sure we nurture creativity and opportunity as well, chance for a fresh start. But it's a chance to really kind of look at what do we really value, what is it that we really want to take forward, and that might help us then prioritizing. So making sure that those things are really what we really give our energies to. For the children's workers as well, you've potentially got the loss of a cohort as well, because there's maybe a year, 2 years of young children which haven't joined playgroups or may now be just going off straight to school, and there's that missing thing, but then that's also a chance for a fresh start as well. So there's all that to think about as well. I think there's going to be challenges, but I love the word, I think, was it Suzanne, was it your word, stickability, things like Messy Church, things like that, where playgroups I think will always be okay, but I think things like Messy Church, it doesn't stick quite as much to be able to go to bring that back again. Let me see. What we wanted to just get rid of was definitely the unnecessary meetings. How many unnecessary meetings? When you sit there and you go, really?
Yeah.
This could have been sorted out in an email, But yeah, that hybrid thing that'll be going forward. And I mean, I know especially when there's quite a few of us that are part-time as well. So it's great doing Zoom because you're cutting out the travelling time either side. So it's given us lots of flexibility as well. But we hear what everybody else has said about actually you just end up cramming more in. So it's always the way, isn't it? Okay, and what we do want to take forward is that freed up quality time that we've had a little bit more. So whether it's family time, whether you've been incorporate, get your prayer life in order, or balance and well-being, all those sort of things, want to try and keep that in as much as we can. And think that's most of what I've got. Was there anything else, Gang?
That was very fulsome, Lorraine.
Sorry.
No, in a good way, very fulsome. Absolutely not a negative. Really, really good. And actually really helpful because, you know, context specific as well. So some of the things that, you know, maybe other people won't have to worry about, but actually it's really good that we all know the sorts of things that are going on for our children's workers, so we can all have an eye to that when people are nagging maybe somebody in the office about why children's work's not happening. So that's great. Thank you ever so much. Can we come to the youth? I know you were only small, but you were perfectly formed. There was just three.
There was just three of us. We had a good conversation. In a lot of ways, obviously, very, very similar to what people said, and to what, particularly to what the children's workers said in terms of volunteers. We thought that the question perhaps that was missing a little bit was the fact that we need to acknowledge and we need to ask ourselves the question, how have we changed as people? Recognizing that in 18 months of working anyway, things would have changed, but obviously the ways we've had to develop working and things like that, things are changing very specifically and perhaps haven't changed quite as organically as they might have been. And kind of, I guess, reflecting on the idea of going back to what we were doing before. And it's like, you know, if we get too caught up in going back to how things were, we're not acknowledging that things have changed. We also said that young people, as with a lot of groups, will have some anxieties about being back together. Even if they're really keen to be back together, actually there will still be some anxieties around there. How we balance including those who can't join us physically for whatever reason. So my youth group, some of my young people have gone off to university in the time we've been online, but are still engaging with the youth group and their friends in their local home setting. So how we kind of continue to balance that a little bit. And we talked a little bit as well about supporting young people with social gatherings and rebuilding relationships, but also acknowledging that we're going to have a whole group of young people who haven't experienced some of that safe risk-taking behaviour. So the things like spending a couple of hours at a party with their friends and trying alcohol and learning what their limits are. And actually, there's very feasibly going to be a group going off to university in September, moving away, having never had any of those experiences. And yeah, whilst we shouldn't be encouraging them to drink, actually, there is a part of youth work that's about supporting and encouraging them to take safe risks. You know, we've not had that as workers, but equally the young people haven't had those opportunities. Again, the conversation about how the people that we work with changed, how's that affected their capacity and ability to support. So we're saying particularly Chris, two of his key volunteers have had massive changes in their life situations. One's about to get married, the other one's had a baby. So obviously the impact on their ability and capacity has changed massively. And obviously being online is very different, as we said earlier on about childcare. You know, for the one with the baby, being online is very different to having to make sure a partner's at home or somebody else can look after the baby for her. And we also had the thing that actually as youth workers, and I guess somewhat as children's workers as well, we have to go out and find the work. Whereas with ministers, the work kind of comes to the ministers, the baptisms, the funerals, the weddings, all that sort of stuff, the pastoral stuff. As youth workers, we have to go out and find the work. And obviously we don't have young people on. I mean, I guess we said it was a bit of a reflection really in the fact that there's only 3 of us that are identify as youth workers now. I appreciate that some of the children's workers are kind of organically moving into youth work, but yeah, the reflection that there's only 2 or 3 of us that are identified in this whole group as youth workers kind of reflects in some respect how the church sees young people. They're not on the doorstep, they're not necessarily part of the regular congregation, but how do we kind of rebuild that? And also some stuff about getting back to the status quo, and the people that want to get back to the status quo are the adults. But as Amy was saying about her son and joining on Zoom and things like that, what are we doing for the children? What is there for the children? You know, and how do we sustain that when we've got people that have actually put things down and are quite glad to have put them down? And I think that pretty much, I'm just looking over what I've noted. I think we've pretty much
covered.
the other thing we said that for the three of us, we kind of felt that there possibly wasn't so much grieving for us, because we were kind of thinking about what doors are going to open as a result of what's had to be let go. So for us ourselves, we possibly weren't grieving so much, but we recognise that there'll be some situations in some of our local churches where things might have stopped that are causing grieving for those people.
Yeah.
But perhaps not so much for us on kind of the circuit working level, maybe.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
And it's a good reminder that, youth work is all of our responsibilities, not just our paid youth workers. Otherwise, we will have no young people in our churches, and we need to support our 3 youth workers that we've got left. Lastly, but not leastly, can I come to the other group? You know who you are, and you know what jobs you do.
I can speak for the others if no one else wants to.
So we didn't decide on anyone.
we didn't know. Do you want to go, Paul?
I think we could probably all throw bits in, because I think the bit that I found most useful was that we're all sort of going that we don't actually know what anyone needs because of the communities we're working in, and that they're very, very different, dispersed communities. And at the moment, we're kind of going back and going, actually, we don't know what any of these churches or communities need. We don't know what questions people have. So we kind of need to find out what all of our church and local or city communities are actually looking for, rather than us making the assumptions about them.
Mm.
And I guess we spoke as well about the I suppose the things that we've discovered online, and things that we've discovered that we can do online, and the way that that's been a good adaptation, and the way that's still not very near perfect, but also the importance of how we enable we enable to be able to engage with those people who best engage in our buildings, sort of on-site type stuff, and those who best engage digitally or online. But actually the awareness that we can't just do twice as much as we used to do before, because that's not the route to a more productive, flourishing church. So we kind of spoke about that, and the need to think in both those worlds, and act in both of those worlds, and kind of take kind of quite different approaches that they might need. And also whether it matters or not that those become different kind of worshipping communities or church communities over time, whether they need to stay connected and joined up, or whether it's okay to be different and separate.
I think the other one with that is going to be acknowledging that not every church needs to do everything. And historically, we've always thought of that. And the big strength I've seen over the last year is churches across circuits really actually, almost for the first time ever, starting to think connectionally, and realize that they don't have, just because you've got a passion for youth work doesn't mean that you have to do it in your home church. It could actually be at another church in the circuit. It could be at the local Anglican church down the road that's got a really brilliant youth ministry. We're not all called to do everything all the time, and that's going to include the online stuff. Actually, if your church doesn't have anyone that wants to join online, and you just don't have the people or the facilities to do it, I don't think it's a big issue, as long as there is somewhere that's doing it that you can point people to if they come and ask, and just be ready to keep reassessing what you're doing as well.
Brilliant. Thank you both so very much. Very, very helpful reminder. And I think this idea that we don't have to do everything, I mean, that's what circuits were set up for in the first place. And so if we ever got back to that kind of thinking, that would be a major step forward for all of us, wouldn't it? We're going to have a little break now. I'm just going to suggest that we take 10 minutes, if that's okay, just get a quick coffee. Say there's loads of stuff coming through in the chat about resources. I've put the CPAS stuff around recovery, but also Lydia's got something there about mental health, and Jonathan's posted something about Tim Jansen running a course. So we will save the chat as always and filter out any of the good bits to send to you. I mean, that's not an insult to anybody who we filter out. Please don't take an insult. Just think it might be useful to everybody.
I do have, from the conference I was at the other day, a whole bunch of research on hybrid church, which I could put into a shared folder, because some of it looks really good.
Yep, thank you.
That'd be good.
Really helpful. I think that's one of the greatest things about, you know, our network is this opportunity to share resources and not have to reinvent the wheel. When we go back into our breakout rooms this time, our question is going to be, how do we manage expectations? We've spoken quite a lot about different user groups, about different stakeholders. How do we manage their expectations as well as our own? And, you know, some people will be working in a context where you've got multiple voices, multiple pulls, and potentially people's expectations being contrary. So it's quite difficult. So conversation on how do you manage that? What might be a good way of kind of managing that? And then we'll come back for some brief feedback in the plenary to give ourselves plenty of time for the last breakout. So welcome back, everybody. If you're happy, we'll just have a brief sharing, if that's okay. We'll try and keep it as succinct as possible, so we've got a bit of time for the last question. And I'm going to swap things around a little bit this time. So can I come to children first this time? Anybody been nobbled from children?
Yeah, me again.
You
I'll
again,
be
Lorraine.
shorter.
Yes.
It will definitely be shorter. So again, we'd kind of gone regular communication, so being in touch with schools and just seeing where everybody's at, I think, really. So it just kind of managing those expectations, just kind of going, right, okay, here's what we're thinking, what are you thinking, and just keeping the lines of communication open, I think. But also we talked about understanding what expectations are, so how we go about doing that. And it's about those relationships, again, just being able to talk to people, or I think some people are doing like reviews across their churches to see what new things have come up. And and it's like a two-way thing as well, so understanding what people's expectations are, but also telling them what we can do, because there is then the expectation that we will do everything. If we ask them what they want,
yes,
or what they're then going to expect that we're going to do it. So it's kind of managing that well, we can still only have so many people and all those things, and just about trying different things, and just telling people that we're just going to try different things, because again, people might not even know what they want themselves. So like, we try that, and we just keep the lines of communication open, just keep chatting, keep talking, and see what happens. And that's all I'm going to say.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lorraine. It's interesting because Walter Brueggemann did a lot of work around prophetic imagination, and he talks about, you know, at this stage when you're kind of starting something new, it does require real grace, because you are going to fail, you are going to fall, we're going to get things wrong, and creating that environment and culture of actually, you know, we don't know what's going to work, but we're going to try new things. It's really important. Thank you so much. We've got two community groups this time, because you were a little bit large last time. So I'm going to come to community group 1 first, and that's got Ellie, Glenda, Helen, Liz and Tom in it. So has anybody been asked to share?
We didn't nominate anybody to write anything down in our group.
Go Helen.
I'll give a couple of things and then other groups. We talked a little bit in our group about managing expectations of congregations, and about who would be contacting them. So for example, a lot of people still have the expectation that ministers or supers should contact them rather than a lay worker, even though it's maybe a circuit-wide team, and about helping to re-educate people around that, but recognizing that everybody is an individual and that they need to know that they mean something, you know, they're cared for. Yes. And what have you. So I don't know whether anybody else in the group want to add to that.
Thanks, Helen. Anybody else got anything they want to add? We've worked so hard over the years, haven't we, to encourage our congregations to understand it's not just the minister. We've got a whole pastoral team out there, and that's going to be even more important in the future, isn't it? Brilliant, thank you. And community group 2, the other community group 2. Any thoughts from you? Catherine, Kim, Mary and Steve. Nobody been asked in that group? Right, I'll move on. Maybe you can just text each other or message each other.
Oh,
and say who's
sorry, I was in the middle of talking, but I didn't unmute. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry, Steve. I haven't got the big screen up, so I couldn't see that. Off you go.
Apologies, sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, so from our group, we just said about the first step really just to actually just to listen to people, because of course we need to know what their expectations are in the first place. And I think initially, you know, the attending church, or the overriding thing is that we actually meet together, and you know, we look briefly at various different small groups that might normally meet, and you know, asking what their expectations might be, and communication was key, as we've already heard. And I think it's just, you know, there's lots of communications flying around saying, when are we reopening? People saying we're not ready to come back if we do reopen, etc., etc. And I think we're sort of in that limbo period at the moment, really. I think people are feeling. But the final thing that we mentioned was that, you know, as paid workers at the moment, certainly when we get back, we're anticipating quite a lot of expectation about what it is that we do as individual paid workers. You know, there's a lot of concern about everything being thrown at us, where, you know, we've said before about how some people have relinquished the posts and some people are not coming back, etc. So there's a deal to be thought about there as well. But I think good communications and simply just getting back and listening to people are the top priorities.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that active listening is going to be vital, isn't it? Office, can we come to the office next?
It makes us sound like a TV show.
I know, The Office, very glamorous.
Sorry, I'm not very good at jokes. we had an idea about, we were similar to everybody else: communication, honesty, being kind in the process. Wondered whether explaining risk assessments might help the people we're talking to, and then acknowledging there are so many unknowns. We can't, also recognizing we can't meet all needs, and to be vulnerable rather than falling into the trap of performance.
Yes.
And so join with other people in our communities that are doing things well. So that dialogue with wider groups of people, with other community organisations, our local authorities, and understanding expectations from outside the church as well. And I wondered if anybody in the group, early on in last year, National Churches Trust did a piece of research on what our communities were looking to churches for. And it was really interesting. They published it in the summer, but I haven't seen anything since then. And whether we need to, because we can't all do this, we can keep the conversations going, but that level of robust research would be really helpful, because one of the things that surprised me last year, in the middle of the first lockdown, people were looking, their number one thing wasn't food assistance or that emergency response that we were all scrambling to do. It was actually people already understood the churches were going to be places of remembrance and commemoration.
Yes.
And if that's still the case, are we stepping up to the plate and actually offering that adequately, with others possibly in our community? It doesn't all have to be within a Methodist church context. But anyway, that's it.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Angie. And so important to remember the wider context. I've got on my notes that there was a BBC Rethink podcast where they were looking at the wider context and asking those kind of questions about, you know, expectations. So that might, I'll pop it in the chat, but that might be something else to have a little look at. The other thing that we've got down is the EBOR lectures. EBOR lectures, they've been doing 5-10 minute video reflections on, you know, 2020 vision, which will be now 2021 vision, and sharpening our focus, it's called. So I'll pop those two in and send those round. But yes, you know, if we don't ask the community, we'll never know what they need and what they want, will we? Brilliant, thank you. Can we come to youth next, please?
Yep. So pretty much very, very similar to what's already been said, really. We were sort of saying that we have the added problem again, that churches often employ children's workers as well, pastoral workers, but I think with youth workers, they have an even more vague idea of what they want us to do. So again, managing those expectations in terms of what do they think we're capable of doing, what are the sort of things, what are the sort of things that they're wanting us to do, and things like that. Kind of very similar to, I guess, what Lorraine was saying with the children's workers, that kind of, what are you wanting us to do and what can we actually do? So yeah, kind of similar, I guess, to what other people were sort of saying. I was also saying it's a good time to kind of be reviewing what we've been doing and what we can kind of try new and all that sort of stuff.
Brilliant.
I think that's pretty much it, unless Chris or John have got anything else. No, cool.
That's great, thank you. I mean, the other thing I was wondering as well is, it's really hard and we don't like conflict, but where you're conflicting expectations, and a bit like Angie was saying about actually talking to people about the risk assessments and what all of those things entail, actually getting those different groups together for a conversation, just so that they each other and begin to understand that actually to fulfill your expectations is going to actually make this group feel completely uncomfortable or whatever it might be, and we don't like handling conflict, but sometimes it's important to get all those voices around the table together, isn't it? Right, lastly but not leastly, and I didn't mean to come to other last, I meant to put you further up the list, but sorry about that. So the other group, anything you want to share?
Yes, I'm just going to feedback briefly.
Thank you, Neil.
Well, actually, I think Paul summed it up right at the end of our, quite succinctly at the end of our conversation, because he said we need to talk more and pray more, which kind of was the gist of our conversation. So talk more, as people have already said, kind of in terms of consultation, dialogue, kind of getting buy-in from people. And also recognising perhaps that sometimes the needs of different communities might be a little bit different, possibly even in conflict. So, your existing, what you could call your settled church community might want slightly different things to the wider community or the wider need for mission. Prayer. Well, we do tend to have a talk in, we perhaps limit our expectations and kind of sometimes leave God out of the conversation a little bit, and talk about kind of what the church can do, what the circuit can do. And we maybe need to be a bit more attentive through prayer and discerning, what God might be capable of in terms of expectations, which feeds into this thing about taking risks and trying new things and, pushing the boat out. So I think that was pretty much the summary anyway of our conversation. Talk more and pray more.
Talk more and pray more. That's really, that's got to be the foundation, hasn't it? Fantastic. We're going to go into our final little breakout room. I put the question in the chat. What do we need to sustain and equip us on this journey? So this is really about you as individuals, or you as your kind of, in your small groups. What are you going to need over this next few months to survive and to get through and, to look after yourselves? I mean, well-being, mental health, we've talked a lot about these things, but how well are we really looking after our own selves and each other? So 15 minutes on this one, if that's okay, and then we've got a bit of time to come back together. We've just got a very little while now before we finish at 1. So as I whip round the rooms, if you could just give us your top 2 or 3 tips for, sustaining well-being, that would be fantastic. And if somebody said yours already, perhaps go to your number 4. That would be really helpful. So I'm going to come to other first this time, so I don't leave you till the end. Anything from you?
Shall I go?
Thank you, Paul.
I think the main point that we came away with is that we just need to be gentle with ourselves and with each other, because a lot of people are really tired and no one knows what's going to be coming next. And we've all got different expectations, so just kind of be gentle, be kind, I guess.
No, that's great. Thank you ever so much. Children? Sorry, you're not children, children's workers.
Yeah, that was thank you, Paul. That was one ticked off my list already. Yeah, that was a big good to ourselves. And the other thing that we found really, really valuable was the peer support over the next, of the last year, and going forward as well, because it's going to be another massive year of pressure, expectations, and transition, and support of other people going through the same thing is going to be really important and valuable.
Thank you.
Things like this. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah. No, thank you. Community one, community people in the first group, which was Ellie's group. Sorry, Ellie, you're on mute. That's it, you're off mute.
Yeah, right.
Well,
everything that everybody else has said, make sure you've got a good support network, both socially and work-wise, and that you take advantage of that. We do think that there's going to be a lot of people moving forward who've stepped down from roles, just to make sure that all that doesn't fall on the paid workers. So good time management, making sure that there's plenty of time in it for yourself, as well as for the things that people are expecting you to do.
Fantastic, thank you. Thanks, Ellie. We come to youth.
Yeah, we had quite a good conversation about all sorts of bits and pieces, but basically our top tip was about finding the things that you find life-giving. And yeah, so that was, that's our top tip.
No, that's really great, and prioritising them so they don't always fall to the bottom of the to-do list and you run out of time. Fantastic. And the office, lastly.
We not surprisingly identified, same as everybody else, but found particular challenges with re-establishing boundaries, because from home working to the transition to office, so ensuring that we have time to recharge and proper refreshing time off, and we were also intrigued about what district, region and connection might be planning for this.
Thank you. No, that is really important. Interestingly, those of us who were at the Yorkshire North West Development Day on Saturday, we had a full day on wellbeing with lots of different workshops and different types of wellbeing and how do we look after ourselves, as well as input from Paul Wood from Ministries and Becca Byas, who's the wellbeing officer in Notts and Derby district. It did strike me as slightly ironic that on a Saturday we were doing a day on wellbeing, which might not have been everybody's cup of tea. So it is interesting, and it's difficult, isn't it? That has been recorded, so I will find out where that's gone to on the ether, and hopefully we'll be able to send out links to some of that, because I think some of the workshops are recorded as well, so there might be some helpful stuff in there. But I think it's going to be at the top of our agendas as we move forward, as is all the mental health training and support. So thank you for that, and thank you for that reminder to us all. And actually, just to say, from the perspective of this lay employees community of practice, if there are things that you would really value us covering, then please do just let us know, drop us an email, let Catherine, let me know, because this is your space. So, we don't want to be having input that's not helpful. So things that you would find really useful, do let us know, and we'll try and make sure those happen. Just a little notice really before we finish. We've got some training coming up, Growing Through Change and Conflict, in June, and also lay leadership skills training. So we're going to send out flyers for those two with all the chat and the various links from today. So Laura's asking if she can have a quick plug. Yeah, Laura.
Yeah, can I just have a quick plug for anyone from Yorkshire West? There's an email gone around this morning about our next district community of practice. If you've not had it, can you just drop me a message or an email and I'll make sure you get it. I'm conscious that our mailing list has changed somewhat over the last few months, and I'm not sure I've quite caught up with all the changes yet. If you've not had that, can you let me know?
We were looking for the date of our next regional community of practice and have failed to find it. So we will put that in the email as well. That comes
October. The regional one, I think, is October, something like October the 8th.
October the 8th. Thank you, Laura. So that's
I only know because that falls to me, I believe.
Okay, you're leading. Excellent. Excellent news.
Yeah.
So
October the 8th, it's a Friday.
So we'll be together for that one, and I don't think we've got anything planned for that yet, Laura. So again, if anybody's got anything that they'd like us to cover, please do get in touch. Unless anybody else has got any more notices, I think that brings us to the end of our morning. We're not going into breakout rooms this afternoon, obviously, because we've spent so much time in breakout rooms this morning. But if you haven't had a chance to have that kind of little coffee chat and catch up sort of space, then please do just stay on for a little while, because we can make that happen. Catherine's got to drive all the way back to Sheffield, so I'll host that if Catherine needs to get off. But that just is a little opportunity if you want to have a bit more catch up. But can I suggest that just to end, we unmute ourselves and we share the grace. It will be it will be a racket, but we love a racket, a holy racket. May the grace
of our Lord Jesus Christ,
Christ,
the love of God,
and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit
be with
us all
evermore.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. God bless. And for all those people taking holiday over the summer, I hope you have a wonderful time and some rest and recuperation wherever that might be.